My name is Aurora Rose Walker. I'm from Beach High School and I'm doing a report on the Haitian Revolution. And I came to ask you a few questions because I heard you were from Haiti.
Yes, I am. Welcome to the United States.
Thank you. United States or Haiti? And when did you come to visit or stay in the U.S.?
I was born in Haiti. I came to the United States when I was just turning 8 years old.
Ah, well, welcome to the U.S.
Thank you.
What was it like in Saint Domingue?
But I came before you were born.
Oh, 1998.
So I welcome you to the U.S.
What was it like in Saint Domingue or Haiti during your childhood?
Oh, during my childhood in Haiti was a very pleasant childhood with my parents and my brothers and sisters, a lot of family. But that changed very suddenly with when Duvalier began his purge and he began to arrest people and people were killed. My mother spent time in jail and my mother was arrested. And my aunt took us over the fence and we were hidden away for many days. Some months later we left Haiti and we came to the United States.
Okay. What kind of people or society were made up of Haiti?
Haiti is a society that predominantly of descendants of African descent. Those were the descendants of former slaves. Haiti was the first successful slave rebellion that established an independent country. Before Haiti, there were no slave insurrections that had succeeded before.
Okay. As a descendant, what's your opinion on the Haitian Revolution?
Well, I think the Haitian Revolution was one of the most significant events in the evolution of liberty in the Americas. Because the Haitian Revolution is not only the revolution of the Haiti, but the Haitian Revolution, without the Haitian Revolution, you also don't get the liberation of South America from the Spaniards as well, because the Haitian Revolution and the independent Haiti became the catalyst for the liberation movements in South America that leads to the freedom of Colombia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Chile, all those countries in Latin America and South America become free as a result of the Haitian Revolution.
Okay. What states or colonies ruled over Haiti?
Haiti was initially, at the time of the independence, was French. In fact, I should say that Haitians are not only Africans, but also they are French descent. It's a mix because there are ancestors that are French, ancestors that are Spanish, and people intermarried. And so you have people of mixed descent. At the time of the Haitian Revolution, Haiti was ruled by the French. But Haiti was first colonized by, the island was first colonized by the Spaniards. The Spaniards lost it to the English after the British Armada was defeated. One of the concessions was that the English took over that part of Haiti. And then Napoleon came and defeated the English. And then Haiti became French.
Okay.
So it was a succession of of European wars.
And how long did that last?
Well, from the discovery of Haiti was the second island discovered by Columbus.
Oh.
So Haiti, in 1492, Columbus lands in San Salvador. And then Columbus then finds Hispaniola, and he calls Hispaniola Little Spain. That's how he named Haiti. And Haiti becomes the major location of Columbus's first major settlement. Is in Hispaniola. And then he discovers the other islands, Puerto Rico, and the islands nearby. He navigates to those. So Haiti goes back to 1492, and for that first long period, Haiti is Spanish until it's lost to the French, until it's lost to the English.
Okay. As a people, were they self-taught or were the people taught?
Self-taught in terms of literary?
Mm-hmm.
It varied. In fact, Haitian society, very different from slave society in the United States, because some slaves didn't know how to read.
Okay.
It depended on the families, but also because, unlike the southern United States, when Europeans had children with slaves, they were almost expected to free the children, so the children learned to read. Also, the mothers were free, so that expectation that if someone had a relationship with an African woman, that her children would be freed. So you have a large class of Haitians who were free, who could read. In fact, one of the most significant writers in France, who's buried, there's a place in Paris called the Panthéon, where the greatest writers and thinkers of the French society are buried. One of them who is buried there is named Dumas. Dumas, have you heard of the Three Musketeers?
Yes, I've heard of Three Musketeers.
You've heard of Count of Monte Cristo?
A little bit.
Okay, Dumas writes. Dumas is a writer. He was one of the great writers of the French era. Dumas is born in Haiti. In fact, it was his father, Alexandre Dumas, his father was born in Haiti of a black woman and was brought to Haiti, to France, to be educated by his aunts.
Okay.
Sorry about that. And so he goes to France. So he's literate. Even Louverture could read. Toussaint Louverture could read somewhat. But there was most Haitian slaves could not read.
Okay. So, what was the difference in the educational system in Haiti and the United States?
The education you mean in recent times?
Yep.
In recent times, the education system is slightly different. It's much more like the European system, where you have primary school, and secondary school goes for 13. School is 13 years. The last year of school is what's called the advanced level. Sometimes it's called philosophy that year, and sometimes it's called advanced level in England. That's the educational system. And then there's university afterwards. University is not 4 years of university, because the advanced level is almost like a year of university. That's the end of your formal education. And if you go to university, you go to university for 3 years, and then you might go to medical school, whatever you're going to do. So it depends what you do.
So during your childhood, what school did you go to when you were younger?
I went to kindergarten. Was Au Galop. Au Galop, which is a kindergarten. I still remember it. I visited it, and I remember it as a very large place. When I visited it as an adult, it was a very small place. I also went to a school run by the priest of the Holy Spirit called the Petit Séminaire, called SM Martial.
Oh.
The Petit Séminaire was a school. It's a school, I think, where my father gone. And I went there until I left Haiti, which was, I would have been finishing my third grade.
Okay. What kind of economy exists now versus then?
Then, you mean at the colonial period versus now?
Yeah.
The colonial period, the economy would be mainly agricultural. Haiti was agricultural. The agricultural resources of Haiti were traded mainly to Europe, to the metropolis. That was the colonial system, where colonies planted, and, for example, a lot of fibers, which would be like cotton, things like that, would have been grown in Haiti. But the biggest things grown in Haiti would be coffee, chocolate, were traded to Europe. Haiti was one of the great coffee-producing places, but also other indigenous plants that were traded to Europe would have gone to Haiti.
How did Haiti help themselves?
How did Haiti help themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Well, mainly through the Haitians helped themselves mainly through their resourcefulness. I would say the resourcefulness of making do, because Haiti had the opportunities that were denied to Haiti. Because we have to put the Haitian history in context. After the Haitian Revolution, the United States and France, because remember, Jefferson was president of the United States at the time. Jefferson was a great Francophile, a lot of French things. Jefferson and the French resented the revolution in Haiti. So Jefferson and the French agreed, and even the English, who were anti-slavery, there was an embargo on Haiti. The embargo on Haiti lasted from the revolution in 1804 until the end of the Civil War. So Haiti was isolated, and this is longer than the embargo against Cuba, if you think about it. And the embargo from Haiti created an economic crisis in Haiti, which lasted for a very long time. And that has had a corruption in government, and also a limitation of the society because of that isolation from the rest of the world. Haiti was only open to the rest of the world, only to the rest of the European markets, and to the American market only at the Civil War. And the first the ambassador to Haiti was the great American writer Frederick Douglass.
Yes.
He was briefly ambassador to Haiti. But that was the opening. Before that, there was no relations between Haiti. And part of that was that the Jeffersons saw also the example of the Haitian Revolution as a Southerner was a very bad example for the slave-owning states, that if we let the example of Haiti continue, how could we keep our slaves in the control in the South?
Well, what kind of resources they do to maintain that control?
To maintain the control in Haiti? In Haiti, we overthrew the slave masters. But overthrowing the slave masters was something that Southern planters in the United States did not want anyone to hear about. So essentially, the embargo in Haiti was basically saying, like, we're not going to let this happen again. So, and the Haitian example, when I say the Haitian example was contagious, the analogy to Cuba is real, because the Haitian example was that the Haitian Revolution became an infection in Latin America, because the revolutionary fervor in Latin America grew from the Haitian example. Once they overthrew one colonial master, the next thing that happened by the 1820s was that Simon Bolivar, Bolivia is named after him. Simon Bolivar is a revolutionary, like Che Guevara. Simon Bolivar goes down with an army and tries to repel the Spanish colonial masters in Venezuela and Bolivia. He's defeated, he's crushed. He has no place to go. Where does he go? He goes to Haiti. He goes to Haiti, and in Haiti, the president of Haiti, he spends time in Haiti, rearms him. He gives him men. In fact, my brother sent me a book where he says that, my name is Verret. He says, there's a slight little passage that says, it is two merchants in Jacmel, Verret and Price, who sell these guns to Bolivar. To get these guns to Bolivar. And then there's a list of things that Bolivar is getting. And so you have, and he's not an ancestor of mine, but he would have been probably related, cousins, like it's the only family. There's a family. Not that distant at the time, because the Verrets were pretty new. But so Bolivar is armed by Haiti the second time. He goes down. He succeeds. So much so that whenever something bad happens in Haiti, good or bad politics, the first country that has sent aid to Haiti is Venezuela. Because Venezuela remembers that event, that Bolivar would not have survived if not for Haiti. And so when Jefferson says this example has to stop, he meant it. Because if he let that happen, right, the jig was up on slavery.
Okay, so that would be like, what would be the rise and the decline from that point when he thought of that?
Because the isolation of Haiti was actually was devastating. Economically, was devastating. It lasted for the better part of the 19th century.
Oh.
So it was devastating. So I think the punishment for Haiti for having had the insolence to actually rise up against the slave masters has had consequences even to today.
Okay. What effect did the revolt have on the economy before and after?
Oh, the economy before and after, it had a great effect. But initially, after the revolution, the economy was devastated because the plantation system dissolved. And the new people who were free had to figure out what to do and how to apportion land and things like that. And that even created a civil war in Haiti over that battle, because there were small landowners and big landowners. There were blacks who owned slaves in Haiti. There were blacks who owned slaves in New Orleans. People don't talk about that.
Why did they do it in the first place?
Because it's purely economics. To use the words of Billie Holiday, you should look up the song, it's on YouTube, them that God shall have, them that not shall lose. Those that have had. So they kept there were some who kept their prerogatives. But those blacks who owned lands, who were free blacks who may have owned some lands, wanted to keep their land. But there was also a movement to distribute land among the people. And that caused a clash. There was a great decline in the economy in the early years after the revolution. Now, when Haiti was fragmented between the two empires, then the economies began to flourish again. But then the embargo came up, and then the embargo actually never let the economy rise beyond a certain point.
Okay. What was the catalyst that they brought on the revolt?
They brought on the revolt? Mm-hmm. Slavery.
Mm.
Slavery. The catalyst was basically, remember, in Haiti, they were always, the slaves, especially when you brought new slaves in from Africa, those slaves remembered being free. They remembered being free. Dessalines was born in Africa, okay? Verret was not, okay? Verret was born in Africa as well, okay? But those slaves remembered that. One of the significant, for example, the slaves would actually, even on weekends or on days off, would go into the hills and have ceremonies in the African religions. One of the famous ceremonies is a ceremony of a place called Boakaima, where a voodoo priest, comes from Jamaica, and he has the name Bookman. The reason is because he could read. He's Bookman. And Bookman comes from Jamaica, and he has this ceremony where it is documented in history, where Bookman actually gives a speech where he says, "We shall overthrow them, and this is your destiny, this is the destiny of the gods." And the revolutionary was being plotted in the woods of Haiti. And the other thing that actually was the instigation of the revolution, once the slaves said no, the question was, the freed blacks because there were a lot of freed blacks with the children of mixed and things like that. The freed blacks had to decide which sides they were on. But the freed blacks had mothers, had cousins, had brothers who were slaves. When they decided to go with the slaves, they were the majority, a large majority over the whites, which was why in the South, after that, they passed laws that said that the child of a white person with a slave was still a slave. You did not want those free people because they kept building up because white people kept having children with blacks. And those freed blacks had allegiances on both sides. And so that led to the revolution. And Jefferson and his people were very shrewd. They said, nope, we're not going to let that happen. And that's why it lasted another, slavery lasted another 70 years in the United States.
What kind of culture, presence, people of influence lived at that time?
At the time, I guess one of the biggest things I would say that, first of all, there were people from Africa, people from the United States. The Indians were there before Haiti, mostly died out. There are no traces of them, except in genes, but there are no traces of that. But the Indians who were there, the Taino Indians were there before us. And they were used as slaves, and eventually they died out.
How?
Because from diseases, because the Europeans brought disease that they had never seen. That was the main reason, smallpox being one of them. But also they were used as slaves, and they had not been used to being beaten and treated as slaves. And the Africans who came were somewhat tougher because the only ones who survived the passage were the ones who were stronger, because the weaker ones died on the boats. They were thrown off the boats. So that's one. The other influence that was very important was the French Enlightenment. The French Enlightenment was actually an interesting thing because the French Enlightenment also was a different mindset. It didn't affect Jefferson, but it affected the French. So much so that it was the French who said, for example, that in the Spanish, the Enlightenment affects that you could not keep your child a slave. It was also the Enlightenment was saying all men are created equal. And they began to think about that. So much so that you have certain French people who were living in the colonies when the slaves revolted, who sided with the slaves. Many of those people sided with the slaves. They became officers in the slave army. They were French people who went on the other side. So that also weakened the French side because the French were not even completely certain among themselves, pro-slavery. So there were many French who fought with the slaves in the Revolution.
Okay.
How much more do we have to go?
We have 13 through 23 left, right?
Go ahead.
Why was it considered?
I have someone waiting outside. Go ahead.
Why was it considered to be one of the most productive European colonies of its day?
Because of the agriculture and the coffee, and also it was a center. It was a center of the French colonies. Even so, New Orleans was dependent. The colonies in Louisiana were dependent upon Haiti. The center of the French colony was in Haiti. It was the fish, and especially the crops that could not be grown in Europe, and sugar.
Okay. What was Haiti's involvement with the French and American Revolution?
The French Revolution was that Haitians were involved in the French Revolution in many ways, so much so that there was at least one Haitian that I know of who ended up who was black, went up in the French government, the Committee of Public Safety. So there were Haitians who were in the French Revolution. And there were French who were involved in the revolution. But also in the American Revolution, there were Haitian soldiers who came here and saved the Union Army in the Battle of Savannah, where Washington's army was about to be decimated. It was the Haitian soldiers. The monument on Franklin Square speaks to that. They came in and rescued them.
Okay.
Resource in Haiti, I think mainly its people. What did both Haiti and America and Savannah give back to Haiti? Some things in the recent century, but also dictatorship in Haiti.
Can you name one?
The dictatorship of Duvalier depended upon the Americans.
Oh.
The American occupation and the corruption of government also depended on American. American anti-communism allowed for certain dictatorships to flourish in Haiti.
Okay.
So America gave Haiti both good and bad.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. Wish you well. If you have any question, I've given you my card. You can call me or email me. Okay.
Okay. Thank
Be
you.
well. Sounds like a good project, and I'd love to see the results of your project.